Good morning once again, students. We are back to our class, Bus 106. I hope you have been following the previous classes, doing your assignments, and so on, doing everything that is required for the course. We're looking at the next topic now, which is still on communication. I want to look at barriers to communication. Barriers in business communication. As we said, so we started this lecture. Every communication has its challenges. And that includes business communication. In the model of communication we shared, like 2 classes ago, we see we have things like noise and so on. These noise, these barriers, they could be in form of language barrier, they could be in form of misinformation, they could be in form of the platform we use in communication. So what are the barriers in communication, in business communication, and how do we overcome the barrier? Once you're able to identify the barriers, it's easier for us to be able to overcome them. So you recall that we said communication is not successful unless the receiver is able to understand what the sender is trying to convey. In other words, a communication process is deemed successful when the receiver is able to decode accurately what the sender is trying to convey, what the sender has encoded. So, for this to happen, for communication to be successful, it is very important that the receiver has a shared meaning of the message as intended by the sender. In other words, the symbols, the sounds in the communication are correctly, the receiver has a correct understanding. In other words, it has a meaning or meanings that are mutually shared with the sender. That is when communication is successful. In other words, both the sender and the receiver understand the symbols and the sounds in the same way. So that one is not saying A and meaning apple, and the other one is saying the A as meaning aeroplane. Sender must mean A as apple, and receiver also must understand A to be apple. That is when we have successful communication. So when this process is hampered, when this process is not the way I've described it, that is when we're talking about barrier in communication process. Some of the common problems that cause this barrier: noise, cultural differences, complexity of subject matter, and so on. Cultural differences, people with different cultural background, symbols and sounds in these different cultures may mean totally different things. You recall that we said that communication is not only verbal. No, in non-verbal communication, I want to give an example in that area. In our culture, generally in African cultures generally, when you are talking to an elder, you are not expected to be looking straight into their eyes. However, that is different from Western culture. If you are talking to anybody and you are not looking directly into their eyes in the Western culture, they interpret you as being dishonest. So you are trying to hide facts. However, if you do that as an African, in the traditional African society, things are changing now. If you do that in traditional African society, you are seen as disrespectful. So imagine a Westerner, an African talking, and the Westerner is the younger one, maybe a child, talking to an African elder, and is looking straight into the elder's eyes. The elder will receive that thing as being rude, being confrontational, and so on. So cultural differences is a source of barrier in business communication. Complexity of subject matter is another barrier. The more complex a subject of discussion is, the higher the likelihood of barrier, because the rate at which the uh, sender is passing the information may be too fast for the receiver to process. So what that means is that as a business person, when you are communicating complex subject matter, you want to take it slow. You want to use as many aid as possible so that it will facilitate quicker understanding of the subject matter. The more complex the subject matter is, the higher the likelihood that the receiver will not process, will not understand what the sender is trying to communicate. Another source of barrier business communication is personal biases. Many of us, in fact, all of us, we have bias. There are biases about other people's ethnicity, about other people's religion, about other people's dressing, and so on and so forth. It's almost impossible for us to totally purge ourselves of biases. What is important is that we are conscious of these biases whenever we're in a process of communication. Sometimes people with very good education, with correct accent, pronunciation, when they are communicating with people with poorer, accents, language command, and so on, you're likely to be seeing them as less intelligent. For instance, if the sender in this situation is the person with lower command of language, it's possible for a receiver who has a superior command of language to immediately classify the speaker as not intelligent. And that may make him to tune off totally or partially, then constituting a barrier, making it difficult or impossible to understand what the speaker is saying because of his personal bias. So, semantic problems, these are to do with meanings, um, we give to different words when we are communicating. Meanings we give to them, and also when we use different words to mean different things. The speaker is using this word in this context to mean this, but the same word also mean has other meanings. So the speaker is using meaning one, this receiver is taking meaning three of the same word, So this will lead to barrier. This is what we call semantic problems in business communication. So how do we overcome that? We want to use words that have words that are not ambiguous in the context of usage. We want to use words that are not ambiguous, and if we cannot avoid that, we want to let the receiver know the sense in which you are using a particular word, or the actual the meaning of the word. If you have said that it's likely to be ambiguous. So the responsibility of clearing semantic problems lies more with the speaker, with the sender. So that is why you don't want to be unnecessarily verbose in business communication. You don't want to be unnecessarily verbose, as in using too many words. You want to be as precise as possible. We also have socio-psychological barriers. Socio-psychological barriers. This talks about combination of social barriers and psychological barriers. Sometimes social settings and our psychological makeup they tend to be barrier. They tend to be barrier to communication. Things like cultural differences, personal biases, these are, in a sense, part of social psychological barriers. Filtering. There's a general belief, which is really that we tend to hear what we want to hear. We filter away other things. Our mind has a way of playing that kind of trick on us. We are selective in hearing. We are selective in hearing. Generally, we are selective in hearing. So we filter out those things that our mind is not ready to accommodate, ready to process. Information overload is another barrier. In these days of information technology, in these days of social media, and so on and so forth, internet, you have messages on WhatsApp, you are in so many groups, you have messages on Facebook. All these things will lead to information overload. When we are satiated with information, and then any additional information, we just stop processing it because we have reached our limits. We have reached our limits on how much information we can process, we can handle at that particular period. Sometimes listeners or receivers may have poor retention, probably because while the speaker was talking, their mind was not there. We are not listening actively. So they are not able to retain much of what has been sent to them, much of what has been communicated to them. So poor retention, that's a situation whereby the receiver is able to contain or retain very small amount of information of what the sender has passed out. sometimes retaining less than 50% of what has been said. So meaning the remaining 50% is lost. Many times there are more. This could happen all due to information overload and so many other problems I've highlighted earlier. Poor listening, poor listening. Many times we are eager to talk, we are not listening actively. But I think our assignment on active listening and the topic on active listening will help us to do this. People say God gives us one mouth and two ears so that we may listen more and talk less. Talk less. When we were treating active listening, I told us reasons why we can go off track as listeners when somebody's talking. And one of the reasons I gave is that because our ears are higher capacity to listen to words, like about 700 words per minute, whereas our mouth can talk about 300 words. So this differential can lead to a state of relapse, a state of mind wandering, a state of relapse into other things that's of interest to us. In other words, the 300 to 400 word differential, your brain or your mind, our minds will just wander off the subject of discussion. So active listening teaches us to deliberately bring our minds back to the subject of discussion. The subject of discussion. We have goal conflict when the aim or the goal of the sender and the receiver do not align. That may be due to whatever reason. So these are some of the reasons, these are some of the common problems in communication that leads to barrier, in communication. Slanting, inferring is when we jump to conclusion before the speaker, really points out his point. Okay. All these communication barriers could be grouped. You can categorize them and classify them into one, external factors, organizational factors, and personal factors. All the barriers to communication, barriers that impede the flow of communication in the organization, can be classified into three. External factors, organizational factors, and personal factors. And we can further categorize them into the following, which are physical or environmental barriers, physiological or biological barriers, semantic or language barriers, 4, personal barriers, 5, emotional or perceptional barriers, 6, socio-psychological barriers, 7, cultural barriers, and 8, organizational barriers. So these are the 8 categories you can further classify or group barriers that impede communication in an organization. So what are physical barriers? These are barriers that are caused due to some technical defects in the media used for communication, or due to certain disturbances in the surrounding environment. Sometimes the microphone is making noise, there's a humming sound in the background, the pitch is too high. These are technical defects. There's a glitch in the internet and you need what the speaker is saying. The audio is not working well at some time. So all these are physical or environmental barriers. Oh, there was sudden noise in the class, explosion in the environment while the speaker was speaking. These all are physical or environmental barriers. So we also have physical barriers such as distance, timing, noise, wrong choice of medium, environment, lack of privacy. All this can make communication challenging. All this can make communication challenging. For instance, noise is a major barrier, is the first major barrier to communication. And then these happen, noise tend to distort communication, tends to distort communication. Um, Noise, as we use it in the field of communication, derives from the realm of physics. In physics, noise refers to a disturbance, especially a random and persistent disturbance, which obscures or reduces the clarity of a signal. So, noise distorts, distort, and reduces or obscures the clarity of a signal that is sent. That is sent. Okay, time and distance. Time and distance also can obstruct the smooth flow of information. Um, the longer the, the distance, the less, the poorer the quality of communication. Yes, thank God for technological advancement. Things are getting better. Things are getting better. The world is getting smaller. However, at times, distance still affects communication. That's why we see GSM operators, GSM providers in areas where their masts are not available. The communication is either not there or extremely poor. Extremely poor. So yeah, that's why they need to erect their what they call this, their phones, their masts strategically in order to cover as many things as possible. Okay. Um, Time differences between people living in two different countries may also affect communication between them. Somebody is calling in the morning, but the receiver at the receiver's end is in the middle of the night. It's in the middle of the night. So all these affect communication. Okay. Um, these are some of the barriers to communication. That's have to do with uh, physical barriers. We have busy or crowded environments, physical disabilities, visual obstacles, limited time, poor lighting. All these are examples of physical barriers to communication. Okay. Um, Also, we have wrong choice of medium. Wrong choice of medium. We have so many media of communication nowadays, can be audio, video, and many of these social media platforms, internet-based platform. Some of these media, they are text-based, some are video-based, some are purely audio. We need to select the appropriate medium or combination of media to be able to communicate effectively. If we choose wrong medium, it may act as barrier to effective communication. Sometimes some type of communication requires face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball contact. If in that case you choose to write or send text message, that communication may not be effective. In fact, in these days of information overload, sometimes people send message on WhatsApp and for days, other people, they don't read it. And it might be something urgent. So if it is an urgent or very critical information, and you send it in a group chat, and the fellows, the folks you want to communicate to, some of them they don't read the post, is ineffective. That is a barrier to that communication because maybe you want to call them for a meeting, you want them to supply some sort of information that is time bound, they may not be able to do so. Why? Because they did not read. So the information. In that case, maybe personal calls would have been more effective. Maybe group call would have been more effective. So we need to determine the purpose of communication, the time factor for us to choose the most effective medium, to choose the right medium. Environment also could constitute a physical or environmental barrier. For example, weather can affect the means of communication. Many of us have experienced this situation. Maybe the weather is hazy, a bit cloudy, uh, and then we are not able to, I mean, the signal is poor. The signal of our phone poor, we are poor, and we are not able to communicate smoothly with